Our meeting to order, and if you I have no disclosure of pecuniary interest, but if you have one at any time, please bring it to my attention. Under the community service section, we have no deputations, presentations, and under unfinished business, we have the signed bylaw and downtown master plan signage, but that will be dealt with through the agenda. So we'll move to other agency reports. Chief.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Other agencies, I feel like such an outsider being a part of the agenda. Okay, so your fire department responded to 142 calls for service in August. We're 991 calls to date. Last year at this time, or at the end of August, we were 1,065 calls, so we're down approximately 75 calls. If you look at July and August this year compared to last year, that's the difference right there. So again, I think that totally says, weather. The weather last July and August compared to this year was quite different. So our visitors were less, and the call volume is down slightly. So, what the good news about the weather is our fire danger rating stayed low all summer. We didn't have to change the sign at all. So there were no incidents with respect to open out of control fires. The update on bananas is there's no update, and again that could take a long time. Our Main Street fire was 14 months before they apprehended the two that were involved in that arson. So we just have to be patient and let the police do their work, but they're working hard on that, and I'm in touch with them on a regular basis. Other notable occurrences through the month of August, there really wasn't much to speak of. Just Tuesday this week we had a fire. The apartment buildings on River Road East that Troy Vane owns, there was a cigarette butt thrown into a planter. Started a fire on the upper balcony, but it was noticed right away. It was 9:30 in the morning, and the residents were sitting out on their balcony, so it was noticed, and they put it out with extinguishers. But another very common cause for fires, people are using those planters, and if they don't have soil in them, they have that mossy stuff that sometimes you see in them. It's very flammable. So anyway, they've been ordered to remove all their flower pots from the balconies and so on. It was lucky that the resident that noticed it acted appropriately and did what he did, or we would have had a fairly significant structure fire there. That's an old wooden building, and it was starting to go off the side of the building. And other than that, we're coming into very busy season for us with Fire Prevention Week coming up October 8th through the 14th. So we're gearing up for that. This year's theme targets planning your escape routes. Every year there's we go and we speak to the schools and about everything relating to fire safety, but there's always kind of a target message, and this is planning 2 weeks out. So anyway, busy time for us coming up. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Okay, any questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And resolve that the Community Service Section of Coordinating Committee does hereby receive the September 2017 Fire Department report for information.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Deputy Mayor Volchi.
In favor.
Councillor Bray.
In favor.
Councillor Ego.
In favor.
Councillor Smith.
In favor.
Mayor Smith.
In favor.
Councillor Stockwell.
In favor.
Chair Belanger.
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 7 in favor, 0 opposed.
I will just mention that OPP has moved to other business, so it will be dealt with a little later. So we'll now move to the consent agenda, but I will point out that there has been a number of items pulled. I'm not sure of the town's linking, but Mogul and firearms exemption request, private property sign bylaw, recreation events and facility report, 217 Canada Day celebrations final costs, update proposed major festival area at Sports Park, and that's it. So, resolved that the community service, I should say, moved by Councillor Stockwell and seconded by Councillor Bray, resolved that the community service section of coordinated committee does hereby receive the September 14th, 2017 consent agenda, item 3, 4 through 3.4.3, and that the recommendations contained therein be adopted as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Deputy Mayor by Pulte.
In favor?
Councillor Bray.
In favor?
Councillor Eagle.
In favor?
Councillor Smith.
In favor.
Mayor Smith.
In favor?
Councillor Stockwell.
Favor.
Chair Belanger.
In favor?
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 7 in favor, 0 opposed.
Okay, the first item was the firearms exemption request, and that was pulled by myself and Councillor Bray, so Councillor Bray, I'll let you go ahead.
Thank you. Just a comment, actually, not really a question, but I was disappointed to see that the recommendation is to deny this. 2 years ago, when this resident, or this new citizen, moved to town, he came to town hall and he asked what he could do to run this small cottage business from his home, and it's taken us 2 years to, I know we said no at year 1. For whatever reason, we let him come back in year 2, and we're still saying no. And I just think that we have a goal on this council to establish a business-friendly town hall, and things like this certainly don't demonstrate that process. So I was very disappointed to see that today.
Thank you. Any other comments before I? Sorry, Bonnie?
Thank you,
Or
Mr.
sorry,
Chair.
Councillor.
I was mixed feelings about this, but I compliment Doug Vincent for the work he's done in putting all this information together and the pictures. I had no idea of the range and where that could go, and I really appreciate the photographs and the area. It really changed my mind, and I support the motion.
I pulled this for one reason, and well, maybe two, and I agree with Councillor Smith. The information you provided was very helpful, and certainly I think a little more could be done to make it a more safe environment. But my concern is that he is now firing arrows with a slingshot, which is legal, is my understanding in reading your report.
That's correct, Mr. Chair. I do intend to bring a report back separate. I didn't want to muddy the two issues. It's something that was only brought to my attention at the site visit. I've since Googled and watched a bunch of YouTube videos on this new product that's available now at Cabela's in Barrie. I'm very concerned because it actually is a fully functional bow and arrow, if you would like, but acting through the use of the slingshot. So I will be proposing, I'll be bringing a report back to the next committee to deal with that issue.
Mayor Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Doug. Doug, is there anything this gentleman could do that'll meet any zoning and bylaw requirements that could make this area he's looking to use a little safer, or safe enough that we could accept and make an exception?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Certainly there is a bunch of standards in the industry. I did include a basic one from the Cub Scouts, as I saw Mr. Mogul was actually heavily involved in scouting, so I chose that one. I had 4 or 5 other reports. They all have some basic criteria for range safety and the way in which ranges operate, and they all include a margin of safety, an area, so no matter how many
layers of netting or whatever they have, unless they're standing in a box in a tunnel, it's the accidental discharges that are of concern. And in this particular situation, I don't doubt that the requester is very proficient with his equipment, and the risk is minimal when he uses it. However, it's the accidental, and so I'm not an expert. I couldn't say whether that could be modified if it became a kind of a shooting tunnel with certainly where the arrow can't be misfired. Then I would think it could function. But just with the standard guidelines of a 10-meter side area, there is no 10-meter side area that goes to people's decks along the side of the car.
Supplementary, Mr. Chair. So if this gentleman was to put some netting up when he was using his range, we'll call it, would that satisfy the issue?
I'm not sure that I'm qualified to say that. I just, the range guidelines, I've looked at 4 or 5 different organizations, all have a standard where they actually, some use netting, but they also have that discharge area. So there may be a possibility if someone were to design something and they brought the design back. I don't know that I'd be qualified to say, that this is safe or not safe. Based on what I've seen from the standard guidelines from 5 different reports on range construction, this isn't close to being acceptable in any of those situations. There are indoor ranges, and I've participated in them when I was younger in indoor ranges, and of course they can't leave the building. So I'm thinking that if he in fact had something developed that would prevent an accidental discharge from leaving his property, period, then you could probably be able to do that. And whether the netting would do that, I don't know what's available now, and that would also depend on the projectile and the strength of the boat that he's using.
My point, Mr. Chair, is if we could maybe help guide this gentleman in some direction, and maybe that's just saying here's what we've looked at for what constitutes a proper range for netting and so on and so forth. At least we're trying to help him, to Councillor Bray's point, to move on and create his business. If he can't find that, or for whatever reason he can't accomplish that, well, that's unfortunate, but at least we're trying to help him along as opposed to just giving him a flat no for these reasons. That's my point, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Stockwell.
Mr. Chairman, I have no trouble giving you a flat no. This is a residential area, and you don't do these things in a residential area. And I thought we made that point when it was here before. Obviously, we didn't. And this is, we should simply say no. You're in the, you want to do this type of stuff, and you move out in the area that's properly zoned for it. This isn't it.
If I could, Mr. Chair, there was a couple of comments made about this as a cottage industry. I did make the point of specifically asking Mr. Markland when I was there his desire for a business, if this in fact was something that he was trying to do. And he actually said that it's just simply for personal use and for him and his grandkids to make arrows for them to take out in the bush to do things with. So recently he hasn't indicated that he wants to pursue a business. I don't know if that would make a difference or not in your decision-making process, but I just want to be clear. I did ask him specifically, was he planning to, or was his intention to make these and sell them? And his answer was no.
Mayor?
So thank you, Mr. Chair. My understanding when Mr. Moglen was here before, that this was for his own use. When it came to practicing or testing, I think he said, these arrows. I thought he was going to possibly be selling arrows because he makes them, but the actual physical firing of the arrows, my understanding was pretty clear that it was him and him alone, not. So he wasn't having people coming in and firing arrows. That was only him to test the arrows he had made. So.
And
You
Mr.
can
Chair, just to be
clarify
clear,
that comment I heard.
just to be clear, you said he has the arrows and he tests them there for use by his grandkids, but his grandkids, he did not indicate at any time that they were firing them at that location. That they take them out, I guess they're out with their dad elsewhere, and they use them and experiment with different arrows and things like that. So at this point, he's only confided that he's the only one that has used them. I just didn't want to misdirect you.
Okay, just to comment on this, I'll go back to my original concern. right now, he is legally firing arrows with a slingshot. And I can tell you that the chance of a misfire with a slingshot over a bow is significantly more dangerous. So even if it were to take a period of time to close that loophole with the slingshot, we're putting people at risk. You know, I don't know what our process is to temporarily allow something. I would sort of agree with the mayor. There are products out there now, I wouldn't call it necessarily netting, but a barrier that would stop a blunt arrow. But the one distinction I'd like to make between this and a normal range is the distance the arrow's being fired. This is not a huge distance. So your chances of a significant misfire versus a range where they are shooting 200 meters deliberately at a target is much different. I would like to, at least on an interim basis, look at doing something so that this individual is not firing an arrow with a slingshot.
Charge him.
But, Councilor, you go.
Yeah, under the circumstances, I know we've been through this before, but I'm having trouble okaying or agreeing with this until the safety issue is completely addressed and that we have confirmation that there's no safety problems. So I can't support this until that time.
Could I make one comment, Doug, before I turn it back over to you? From a bylaw perspective, can we ensure that the property owner has advised his insurance company what it is he's doing in his backyard, and that they are covering any liability related to firing arrows with a slingshot?
Mr. Chair, I don't believe there's anything that the town can do to enforce an individual to inform his insurance company. I could certainly ask him. In regards to the arrow with the slingshot, if it's committee's immediate concern that it be dealt with immediately, the department could prepare a report or a bylaw to the effect to change the definition of a firearm to immediately include that. That's all it would be required, in my opinion. It's just to expand the definition in our current bylaw, and that could be brought as a bylaw to the next city of council, I believe.
Does that require a motion, George, or do we just give direction? Or
Mr. Chair, I would suggest that a motion would be appropriate in this case.
Mayor Smith?
So are we suggesting that the use of a sling, or that the bylaw be amended to say that a slingshot is a firearm? Is that what we're suggesting? And I ask because I'm struggling with that. I mean, as a kid, I had a slingshot and acorns were my best friend. So I struggle with making a slingshot a firearm. I'm just looking for clarification.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would look to include a definition that didn't include the general use of the slingshot, but one that held a solid projectile in a shaft with it, has a shaft and tip, basically describing an arrow. There is a specific model, there's a specific thing now that I've researched last week that is being produced. The slingshot itself is designed differently. Mr. Moglen had, for lack of a better term, he jury-rigged his own, an old style slingshot with some duct tape. Essentially, these new ones that project arrows have a cross member in the center, which gives it strength, with a bit of a notch cut out, which actually allows an arrow to rest on it. So when you pull it back, it's kind of like a bow turned on its side, is really what you're doing with the slingshot. So these, I've seen, as I said, some of the YouTube videos, people are projecting and killing deer with them. So that's they are essentially a bow. So I would look to amend the definition to prohibit that type of projectile from being fired. So.
Councilor Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for clarification, so we turned him down last year, and he's now firing not with the arrow, with the bow, but with the slingshot? Or does he continue to fire with the bow?
Through Mr. Chair. The use of the slingshot was a way in which he wanted to demonstrate the safety of his range, because he technically is not permitted to discharge an arrow. I don't know how frequently he's been using that. I did ask the question if in fact he was turned down from the exemption, what would he continue to pursue what he's doing, or would he just stop? And his response was, to me, he would probably continue with his arrows. But he said he also could then start using his slingshot.
Just add to my previous comments, I mean, this guy isn't gonna stop as long as we keep encouraging him, or we're gonna find a way to help him. I think you gotta say no, it's residential area. If I lived next door to him and I had my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren coming to visit, I wouldn't be at all happy. I'd be knocking on bylaw's door and saying, you allow this in this town? What are you, nuts?
Councillor Bray?
Through you, just in response to Councillor Stockwell's comment, there was a note in here that 3 of his neighbors had been approached and they had no problems with this. So to use that as our reasoning, I don't think really holds water, because they've already been consulted.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. Excuse me, was that not for bow and arrow though? Was that not for the arrows, not the slingshot?
Through the chair, I'm not sure. Doug might be able to provide a little more. But I think to use that as our logic doesn't really cut it, because there's already an explanation in there for that one. So I think he tried to do the right thing. You know, he approached his neighbors, he approached the town. If we're still saying no, then we're still saying no. But the things that we had asked him to do, he's done. And now we need to make our decision.
Sorry,
and
Doug.
move on.
Just before that, Doug, could you clarify the range of an arrow? I think it was in your report, and I don't know if the slingshot has the same range, but I believe you clearly indicated it was well beyond adjacent pavers.
Mr. Chair, so the arrow that he produced to me that he was using, he agreed with me. He actually provided me the information and agreed with me. I listened to him. He said it would easily reach the river from his location. I have some experience with bows and arrows, and that seemed reasonable. It probably has a slightly further range depending on how far you pull a bow back. There's kind of a spot where you get used to it, and that's your kind of your draw length. But you can continue to draw a bow back and increase its power. So it's simple. The arrows could easily go 200 meters. The range of the slingshot, I have no idea. I haven't been able to research that. From what I witnessed on videos, it is, you know, the speed of the flight of an arrow and the sound of it hitting a target was very significant, similar to what he would be able to do with a regular bow. And I haven't tried these things. I haven't gone to the manufacturer yet. I have tried to download as much information as I could about it, but I don't have range on those. It is essentially the same length of arrow, I would suspect, because it doesn't have that long a draw, where most bows will have about a 24 to 28 inch draw. It would depend on how elastic the slingshot arms are and how far you can pull that back in relation to yourself and how heavy the arrows. But I certainly think from what I saw and how hard it hit the target, it could certainly leave the yard and be within that the range of the immediate neighbors there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Doug. Doug, did you research or learn anything with respect to the accuracy of the slingshot versus a bow? Is it less accurate, considerably less accurate?
From all through you, Mr. Chair, from the videos that I watched, which were YouTube from people from different pursuits, hunters, target people, they were very accurate there. They were standing back 25, 30 feet. And because of the nature of the new slingshot with this notch, they could be quite accurate with them. Mr. Moglen's home constructed one simply wasn't designed to make sure an arrow went straight. And he conceded that, and he actually lessened the distance to the target just to demonstrate to me what he could do, because he had a concern about not being able to keep it on track. But from what I could see, and only from the videos, I haven't experienced it myself, is that with this new little notch in them, they are pretty darn accurate.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to Councillor Bray's point, I think it's okay that the 3 neighbors have signed off on it, but bear in mind that these houses could be sold at any time, and you have somebody moving in next door to them, and we've agreed to this. Now all of a sudden we have a neighborhood complaint, and I don't put a lot of weight, and by your plan, it looks like there's more than 3 neighbors that are close to him and across the road, what have you. So I don't know, I'm still, I don't think this is a place for this type of activity.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I was just going to say, I think we've had a lot of conversation about this. Could we call the question on this item? And because we're going off into slingshots, and you know, Doug has already said he's not an expert. He doesn't have all the answers. If we want a report, then maybe somebody who wants that can put it out on the floor.
This was moved by, I think that's Mayor Smith. Mayor Smith.
Oh, Councillor Smith.
Oh, Councillor Smith, sorry. Sorry? Oh, okay, very good. So we've had, I think we need a show of hands. We need a majority to call the question. Very good. So moved by Councillor Smith and seconded by Councillor Stockwell. Resolved that the Community Service Section of Coordinating Committee recommend to Council that they deny Mr. Moglen's request to be exempt from the provisions of discharge of firearms bylaw 1999-20 at 19 Dyer Drive due to concerns for public safety.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of committee, having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Deputy Mayor Byfolchi.
In favor?
Councillor Bray.
Opposed?
Councillor Eagle.
In favor.
Councillor Smith.
In favor.
Mayor Smith.
In favor.
Councillor Stockwell.
In favor.
Chair Belanger.
In favor.
In favor.
Yes.
And the motion carries on a vote of 6 in favor and 1 opposed. Thank you.
The next item is private property signed by law. No. Did anyone, should we ask that question?
I pulled it.
I was just asked the chair, there was some discussion about another motion dealing with the slingshots, an amendment to the bylaw, and I just asked the chair if he had received actually a motion moved in second, and he said he had not, so I just wanted to confirm that. So if you have not, then please carry on, Mr. Chair.
I'd be prepared to move the motion about looking into the slingshots. Oh, you've got it right there.
Is there a seconder?
Seconder? We're going to add slingshots to the list. Can we read the, can we read that first?
Do you mind if I read it?
Sure, go ahead.
So the motion as it's drafted currently is that the Community Services Section Coordinating Committee directs staff to prepare an amendment to bylaw 1999-20 to include reference related to a slingshot that can project an arrow within the bylaw and bring forward to a future meeting for consideration.
Mr. Chair, have we not already turned that down in that last vote?
No.
No? It's altogether different?
Yeah.
So could I, Doug, could you clarify? Thank you.
So, yeah, just thank you, Mr. Chair. So report before you was the request for an exemption to use a normal bow and arrow in a residential area, and you've defeated that. You've denied the request. But as a result of the inspection that was done there, it was discovered that there is a new product on the market that's of concern to members of the committee, being a slingshot that can project an arrow. So if we want to prevent people, right now that's legal and it can be fired in town legally. So I'm suggesting that we can amend the bylaw to prohibit slingshots that project arrows only, not the regular slingshot that the kids have when they're used with an arrow. That would be prohibited. That would be considered a firearm and
Okay.
would be prohibited from discharge.
Two separate issues altogether. Thank you very much.
Mayor Smith?
Mr. Chair, could you not project an arrow with any slingshot, though? I'm trying to determine how we're going to decipher a specific slingshot used specifically, because, you know, as Mr. Mogulyn's already proved to Doug, he had a regular slingshot that is jury-rigged to fire an arrow. So I always struggle creating bylaws that we are going to struggle to enforce or can't enforce. So as I'm hearing the motion, it's saying a slingshot that can project an arrow. Well, I could go and buy a $10, well, if you can buy a $10 slingshot, but a $10 slingshot at Home Hardware, and I could project an arrow with that slingshot. So how are we going to decipher this?
Just a comment, like I have to tell you that a ball bearing out of a slingshot would create just as much damage with less accuracy. I believe if we do not entertain another motion, then basically whatever that individual is doing it, and it's his responsibility and liability. You know, I agree with you. If you try to get into the detail of this, you know, there's any number of things could be projected out of a slingshot that would be very dangerous.
There's no seconder.
Yeah, so I guess we're still looking for a seconder then.
If there's no seconder.
I'll withdraw the motion.
Okay. So we're going to the next one. Okay, the private property sign law was pulled by Sylvia Bray, Councillor Bray, Councillor Smith, and myself. Councillor Bray, do you want to start?
Sure, I just felt that the motion wasn't clear. It said we were receiving a report. It actually, in the report, there was a request for seeking direction to move forward. So I just felt that it needed to be pulled, so there was some discussion so that staff could move forward.
Councillor Smith?
Yes, I have a lot of concerns about this, as most people have. I take note of the paragraph that the department, without influence or interference, reviewed the totality of the situation, including the purpose, scope, magnitude, and duration of the organized act of civil obedience, in quotation marks, and chose not to pursue compliance until council had determined a decision on important community issue. We did not, I don't think there was any complaints from any councillor regarding the use of these signs on public property either. I do take note that someone should realize that it is an organized act of civil disobedience. I do believe that if we start putting out the other signs as requested, I'm afraid they'll come out with negative signs and we'll have sign pollution all over the place. And further to that, I would like to suggest that during the election campaign time that none of these signs be available or allowed up except for, and including the ones for the hydro sign, is except for election signs, so that there's none of this sign pollution going on around town during the election sign period. So that's my thoughts. I think, I believe that people, because there were a few complaints deliberately on behalf of myself, I didn't want to be seen as or the council will be seen as not recognizing that this was an important issue for the community. But going ahead, there's the other signs that are out there that are starting to come. I believe they're very positive signs. People have a right to have them up at their home. I'm not sure about public property, but I'm very, very concerned that this was allowed in the first place, that bylaw jumped on this and decided to ignore it, and yet as soon as the other signs go up, within 24 hours they're being pulled down. And, you know, it's just done and over with, but, you know, I'm very, very upset about this whole situation, so. And I think the other ones out there, they need to be looked at separately, and perhaps in the sign bylaw out there looked at case by case, but that's my feeling.
I hold this as well. My comment is I believe there are certain issues that are extremely important to our community and people want to express themselves. I think I would like to see it that we review those major issues on a regular basis, and that there may be an exception. I agree with Councillor Smith. We set a precedent in what we did, and if we have a bylaw and the bylaw is being broken, then it should be addressed immediately. If we make an exception, now we'll have residents that feel they're being unfairly treated because they now want to express themselves as other residents were allowed to do for a very extended period of time. And so I have a concern as to how those people would feel about their rights and how we're choosing from one item to the other. In fact, you know, in the recent celebration, after a lot of dialogue on bylaw signing, there were signs all over the place on public property, on the street, and it even came to my attention that maybe something should be done about it, and I said no. I said these citizens felt very strongly about this issue, and they're now having their celebration, and I would be the last one to try to say no, you know, you can't express yourself at this point. So my personal feeling is that if it has to come to council on major issues and we give direction to bylaw, then so be it. That's what we do. Mayor Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too was very disappointed in how he handled the sign issue with respect to hydro. I understand completely, and I respect Doug's decision on this. It would have been a tough one, that's for sure, and you know, no major harm was being done to anybody. But moving forward, you know, whether we agreed or we agree or disagree with the signs that were up before is really irrelevant. It's done. It's a done deal. It's water under the bridge. This council showed that we had integrity and said what we said we would do, we did. But moving forward, I don't mind sharing with this house. We support the downtown on my front lawn. I've removed it. I removed it because I understand the sign bylaw says you shouldn't be doing that. And although I'd love to see 1 million of these things up in town, my concern is, as Councillor Smith has said, you'll have we support the downtown, and you'll soon see we don't support the downtown. And where does it stop? And all that does, in my opinion, for anyone new, including ourselves driving through town, we see this division. And is that worth it? We all know that council has made a decision. The will of council is to move forward with our downtown master plan, and that's what we'll do. My suggestion to people who support it is to come out and support it, and people who don't, come out and don't support it. But be civil, be respectful of council, be respectful of council chambers, or this room or any other room. Don't be civilly disobedient, and let's move forward. And I think we'll accomplish great things here. But if we start to allow one group to have a sign versus another, I think we create a problem that just is way beyond our ability to control in the long term. And I think we're just digging a hole that we probably don't want to dig. So the sign bylaw as it stands today, although I do think there is some room for some tightening up in the sign bylaw, I think needs to be looked at. But as much as I'd love to see signs out there supporting making our community better, I think that the amount of sign pollution we have the ability to see would be just wouldn't be good for the community. So I will not support having signs for any particular reason, with the exception of election. And other than that, I say let's strengthen our sign bylaw, and let's do what's right by everybody. It's fair for everybody. You can't have it, you can't have it. Not some can, some can't. You can have it during this time or not that time. I don't see any ability there or any reasonable solution to solving those issues as to what's allowed and what isn't allowed. So I can't support any signs at any time.
Councillor Brennan?
Yes, I think reading through the report, there were some options presented by Doug. So option 3 would allow the bylaw review and rewrite to continue, and then examine and comment on the draft when completed. Further direct that until the review is completed, to continue fairly and impartially to enforce the bylaw as needed. So I would like to recommend that option 3 be added to the motion, so that we're giving clear direction to staff to continue in the direction that Mayor Smith just spoke about.
Any other comments? Mayor Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Doug, through you to Doug, Mr. Chair, so allow the review to continue and examine. This is going to look at all signs, correct? Not just these types of signs with hydro or the downtown master plan. This is going to be businesses, how many signs they have, quality of signs. You know, we see paper signs now being made with magic marker and taped to other parts of buildings, and you know, this is going to pertain to all signs and all properties. Is that correct?
Okay, Mr. Chair, yes, Your Worship. We have started the review. It just got stalled with a bunch of other priorities. I have a committee made up of business people that we're helping them try to reactivate them. But it's to deal with actually our private property sign law and our highway sign law, which pertains to public land, and it's comprehensive to include all that. Our election sign bylaw was recently updated in 2014, so it's, I believe, current. It's subject to review, obviously.
And one last comment, I think that effective today, I would like to see bylaw enforce this current bylaw, and to get out there and ensure that any signs that are up and about still are removed, and removed quickly.
Thank you. Just a comment from my, sorry, I'll take it. Councillor Ego, I didn't see that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering if we could make a motion today until this sign thing is all straightened out and we get a report back that there's no signs allowed other than election signs and real estate signs until we get a report back of exactly what we're going to allow and what we ain't going to allow. I'd be willing to make a motion to that effect, because we kick this around all the time, and we're in the middle of what's right and what's wrong. But I think, why don't we just make an example right now that the only signs that are allowed are election signs and real estate signs until the report comes back from bylaw. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to make a comment. I am not going to support the fact that we're not allowed to express ourselves with the sign, and the reason for that is I know for a fact, and it had nothing to do with me, that individuals have made a considerable investments in signs based on the fact that they thought it was allowed because it had been allowed for so long on another issue, and I'm all game to say we'll look at this with the new council, and again, I'm just one vote, but I believe we set a precedent. The bylaw was clear, the signs were not allowed, they were allowed. Had it been nipped in the bud, there would not have been an issue. So we created a precedent, and many of our residents now felt that it was quite appropriate to express your opinion with a sign and to encourage that. We did that, not the residents. So for that reason, I am going to I would make a motion to defer this and that it be addressed by the next council.
So you got two potential motions. Yeah, that's good.
Mayor Smith?
I hear what Councillor Eagle is saying, and I don't disagree. I guess my only concern is there are signs that we currently allow, open house signs, garage sale signs. If we allow only 2 types, then we kind of take away those folks' ability to do what they've always been able to do. I understand the premise behind it, Councillor, and it makes total sense, except we now, you almost punish people for doing what they've always been allowed to do, so
Mr. Mayor, you could include any signs that are already available.
that would work.
Councilor Bray?
If I could, I think we just go back to enforcing the existing bylaw. Those rules exist. There are exemptions for election signs, public safety signs, real estate signs, no trespassing signs. So what we need to do is give clear direction to bylaw to either enforce the bylaw or not for all signs. And I think that would probably be I don't think we need a new motion. I just think we either say, yep, let's enforce this bylaw, or no, let's wait until we revise the bylaw.
Thank you. Just for comment, in Park Place, we're not allowed to have signs on our lawns, but we can put them up against the house or in our windows. Because it's our, and that's how it's enforced in Park Ridge places.
Thank you. So I believe, Mr. Chair, that Councillor Bray had indicated that she wanted the main motion to be amended, and at this point it hasn't been formally read into the record, so that if the mover and seconder of the motion agree, then we can bring that forward for consideration. And what that change was, the way that I had written it, was to remove the for information of this motion, the original recommendation, so that the entire motion would read, resolved that the Community Services Section, a coordinated committee, does recommend to Council that it receive the staff report of the Senior Municipal Law Enforcement Officer on the private property sign bylaw, and further provide direction related to staff to move forward with option 3 contained within the staff report, is I believe what you were indicating. Now I apologize, the mover of this motion is Councillor Smith, perhaps? George, is that Councillor's signature is the first one?
Yes.
Okay. So the mover is Councillor Smith and the seconder is the Deputy Mayor. So are the two of you in favor of that change? I am. Sorry, do you want me to repeat?
Can you read it?
Sure. So in the recommendation, so it's just removing for information, so the report
Right,
isn't.
okay.
And further that further provide direction related to staff to move forward with option 3 contained within the staff report.
That's fair.
So that's what will come forward for
Well,
consideration.
just a point of clarification. So what are we doing while we continue to rewrite and review?
Enforcing the existing bylaw.
Okay. So was that clear? Yeah.
I think it's-
Any other comments?
Well, question?
Yes, Councillor
To
Scott.
you, to the bylaw. So this is not commercial signs. Like if I open a store and I can put Bill's Variety sign and I'm not gonna get into trouble.
Through Mr. Chairman. So the private property sign bylaw covers all signs on all property, including commercial signs. There's special sections for commercial signs. We regulate them now. We have since 1996 when this bylaw came in. So it allows for
So
the
there's-
size of a sign, how many signs it can have on a fascia, how many on a property, that kind of stuff. It's
And do you really monitor that closely?
we see what goes on. The requirement is that everybody apply for a sign. In some situations in town, we have people that don't apply for a sign. We struggle to keep control of signs, period, in all respect. We have sheds full of signs that get up on the side of the road, on trees, on fences. When it comes to commercial buildings and commercial businesses, we usually use our business licensing process when someone comes in to start a new business. they are informed about our sign bylaw. And most people will come through that. I find that some of our existing businesses that have been in town for a long time sometimes choose not to come get a permit, and often they have lots of signs up before we even kind of, you know, we have no kick at the cat, so to speak, so we have to chase them after the fact. Part of our sign bylaw review process was that we wanted to go and refresh all of our laws or rules and see if they made sense. Some of them were made in 1996 and they just don't make sense today. And some of them haven't been enforced for 20, 30 years, and others have been. We're trying to keep on top of it. So when the sign bylaw is refreshed, at that point we would look at all non-conforming signs and make sure that people then conform to the bylaw.
Including commercial.
Including commercial signs, yes.
And so when is that gonna happen?
When we have a new bylaw. So we currently have two. One for our properties for the highway sign bylaw, and the private property sign bylaw, which deals with personal properties and commercial properties, and any other form of commercial property.
I get, you would agree that there are commercial people that abide by one sign, and then there are people who don't abide by one sign. And they have it's a question of why can't they? That's their attitude. And you can kind of wink an eye.
Just, if I may, I think this is, the CO just informed me, this is a little off topic, and certainly the review is continuing, so I think we'll have opportunity.
I just want to make sure, Mr. Chairman, that the review is an all-encompassing review. Because I think you've reviewed it in the past, and somehow the commercial people who are breaking the law on the sign bylaw continue to break the law on the sign bylaw. And if you go out there today, you're going to find a number of them. You know that. And so I just want to make sure that if you're going to review it, that you're going to review the whole scope.
I just, my comment again, I am very concerned at the selective enforcement of bylaws. Had we enforced the bylaw before any sign got to the proportion that it did, it would have been dealt with. And I just believe we are being very selective in how we're approaching this. Setting precedents are challenging. Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's important to note that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Doug, you know, in the past, any bylaw, for the most part, unless it has something to do with public safety, has always been enforced through the complaint process. We simply do not have, Doug doesn't have the manpower. I mean, if you look at how many bylaws we have in this community, and not just this community, every community is the same. I think most communities operate along the same premise. They're complaint-based. And the problem I have with that is it pits neighbor against neighbor often. And so someone has a complaint, and I'm sure Doug gets to the door and they say, well, who's the SOB that complained? Well, Doug can't tell them, and nor should he. And that only will come out, I'm assuming, is if you end up in a trial or something like that. So people are reluctant to complain in many cases because they don't want someone to know they've complained. Or they're not reluctant to complain, they're happy to complain and they want the neighbor to know they complained, but it really does pit neighbor against neighbor. The other side of that coin is we simply don't have the resources, the dollars, or the manpower to enforce these bylaws unless someone does complain. I think what we need to do in this case, I think we need to have Doug provide us with some kind of timeline, and I know they're busy, so that's not easy, but a reasonable timeline, whether that be a month, 2 months, 3 months, say here's when we will have a revised bylaw back to council to look at. And I think that we also need to look at, yes, we need to use the complaint process because we don't have the resources otherwise, but I think the complaint process, it's worked for years, it'll continue to work, but when there's something that's blatant,
Right.
that anybody can see driving by, if someone's got a 50-foot boat in their front yard and they've only got a 30-foot driveway, that's pretty blatant. I don't know why we would have to wait for someone to complain. And I think an officer should stop, just like they would if they seen grass that's 4 feet high, and say, you gotta cut your grass, or you gotta move that boat. So I think we need to give the bylaw department as much leeway as they can so as that they can accommodate all of the work it is that they have to do. But we have to have some clarification on, what is complaint based and what is blatant. And, when you drive by, I mean, if I can see it and 20 other people can see it, then bylaw can see it, then they need to stop and address that issue. So, again, I leave that up. I have all the confidence in the world in Doug and his ability to deal with what it is I'm speaking about and how we might work that into the process. But I think we need to let Doug and his staff go away now, do their job, and come back to us with the best recommendations they can, and we can bat it around after that if we wish, and no doubt we will. So, but I think we beat this horse pretty well today.
No further comment? Moved by Councillor Smith and seconded by Deputy Mayor Byfolke. Resolved that the Community Service Section of Coordinated Committee does recommend to Council that it receive the staff report on the Senior Municipal Law Enforcement Officer on the private property sign bylaw, and further provide correction related to staff to move forward with option 3 contained within the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Deputy Mayor Byfolke.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. So can we give some kind of timeline or get some kind of timeline before we vote on this? And the other item I brought up earlier, are we going to now go out and clean up the signs that are out there?
I think option 3 indicates that as far as the cleanup, the existing bylaw. The timeline isn't addressed.
So I'm looking just for a timeline then as to when we think this might come back to council. No pressure, though.
Tuesday would be fine.
For you, Mr. Chair. Well, the process that I had set up was to try and engage different people who use signs in a committee setting, so trying to get them together on reorganizing those. It took several months to get each meeting. We've had 3 meetings. I would realistically look at, the fall's a little slower than it has been this summer. There's a time to kind of get that up and running again. Realistically, our signs will become an issue for next spring, for next operating season, as people are moving forward. So I would think in the early spring, so I think February or March would be reasonable to bring the report back and give you time to look at the recommendations. It is a very lengthy process and complex. If you look at our bylaw, there's a lot of different sections. We have been doing research all along. We're looking at other communities. We have stacks and stacks of stuff already done, which is kind of ahead of some of the curve. But I could certainly update you at towards the end of the year as to when an actual what committee we can bring that to. Again, it's workload driven. I can't predict what happens between now and next spring. This isn't something that we can do overnight, because I think it's important to involve the businesses. So in a meeting with the realtors to deal with all the real estate type signage, the business owners that have commercial properties. There's a number of different interest groups that I think it behooves us to go to them first, then instead of trying to send something forward to them. To come up with a realistic bylaw that is going to take us for another 20 years. This is 20 years old, so we need to update it for sure, and deal with some of the new stuff like digital signage and that was not even considered when this bylaw was created.
Thank you. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Deputy Mayor Byfolke.
In favor?
Councillor Bray.
In favor?
Councillor Eagle.
In favor.
Councillor Smith.
In favor.
Mayor Smith.
In favor?
Councillor Stockwell.
Favor.
Chair Belanger.
Opposed?
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 6 in favor and 1 opposed. Thank you.
Okay, the next was Recreation Events and Facilities Report, and that was held by myself. And I just had a question related on our ongoing review of electric element ticket sales and what was paid to the town. In this particular report, the amount changed slightly, I believe, from 10,000 to 11, but there was no breakdown as to what the payment was versus 1 day and 2 day, and the tickets that we know were being sold at the event. So I don't know if you have that clarification or breakdown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may, I'll just start. I believe it was myself who commented about the $10,000 deposit that had been cashed already. This was to make up the majority of the fee that the Electric Elements organization was to pay us. And since then, we have given the specifics of the per head number that was verified with a ticket voucher that was requested by council, and the specifics of the 1 day and the 2 day and the 3,500 people, 3,568 people that attended. Perhaps I'll ask Ange to offer a breakdown if she can at this time. But that is, with those specifics, why we have the small balance outstanding, and I think Ange can speak to that check as well.
Sorry, I'm not sure if we ever received a breakdown on ticket sales at the event, which I was confirmed was happening.
And it is in this report now, Mr. Chair. 3,568 tickets were sold for the Electric Elements, and it was verified through a ticket voucher from the ticket sales company.
Okay, I'm still confused. I believe what I was told is they were taking cash at the gate for people to get in that would have never been recorded through a ticket company.
Okay, that
And furthermore, 3,500 people, and granted it's not a great weekend, but this is so far from what the projections were. And I don't know. All I'm saying is if we're going to continue to go down this path, we have to have a pretty clear way to how to measure the attendance if we're going to have people pay by ticket. I'm kind of surprised that it was only 3,500. There seemed to be more people around than that, but I could be wrong.
Ange, yeah, please.
So, towards your comments, so back in June, on June 8th, I had brought a report forward about Electric Elements. In that report, I had a chart that indicated the 2 day versus 1 day ticket sales and which day they were. That total number of ticket sales was 3,000, the number that was clarified. We had estimated that there had been about 5,000 attendees. The weather was poor, and we were told that by the events company that approximately 1,600 tickets were compensated, so that makes up the difference of for the 5,000 that we thought we saw at the event. The ticket report that I received, because they had pre-sale tickets on their website, anybody who bought a ticket online would have gone through this Crowd Torch, which is the parent company to ElectroStub, which is the company they use. Any on-site sales tickets, I don't know how we could track that, to be honest.
Right, but again, I'm going by information that we heard as a council that they were selling tickets for cash at the event, and so far there's been no account of those ticket sales.
And from the information that I've received from the event company is that they had signs up, but they didn't actually sell any tickets. The people at the gate that were picking up tickets were will call tickets, so they had purchased them online and were picking them up at the gate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I simply don't believe the numbers. I'm sorry. And I'm not doubting what staff are saying. Staff are telling us exactly what they were told. I'm confident in that. But they're being told that 1,600 tickets were comped. That's 31%. I don't know any concert or anything that comps 31% of the tickets to their event if they're trying to pay their expenses and make money. So based on that alone, I don't believe the numbers. They are what they are. We clearly don't have any way to adjust or to verify these numbers now. but I certainly think it tells us something about how we should be looking to be able to justify numbers moving forward and who we do business with moving forward.
Okay. So, any further comments? Moved by Councillor Stockwell and seconded by, moved by Sylvia Bray and seconded by Councillor Stockwell. Resolved that the Community Service Section of Coordinating Committee does hereby receive the Recreation, Events and Facilities Department report, monthly activity report as information.
Members of the committee, having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Deputy Mayor Blank-Folchi.
In favor?
Councillor Bray.
In favor?
Councillor Eagle.
In favor.
Councillor Smith.
In favor.
Mayor Smith.
In favor.
Councillor Stockwell.
Favor.
Chair Boulanger.
In favor?
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 7 in favor, 0 opposed.
The next item was the 2017 Canada Day celebrations final costs, and that was pulled by Councillor Smith.
Yes, sorry, I thought somebody else would have pulled it as well. I went going through the report. I think actually when we see the budget versus the actuals, I think we've done a good job. I think it was a great event. Everybody, thousands of people came, we know, and I don't have any problem with the overrun that staff may have based on the event itself, being Canada Day, 150. So, anybody else have any comments? And just further to that, I do like the report, and your recommendation was to do the reports like that, I think, and I do like the report the way it came with the expenses.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I think I want to commend Josh and the team over at Special Events and at Recreation. That I think this was it was a great weekend. I received an amazing amount of compliments to the town and to staff for a very well-run event. There were a couple of hiccups, but that's expected. We're certainly not perfect, and I want to commend staff for the job they did. I'm not happy with the overrun, but it was an event that I think we'll remember for a long time, and I can tell you that I've also had many people say, when are you going to bring more of these types of events to Wasaga Beach? There's no doubt that people love to celebrate and be on the beach to do that, and so I think if we could work towards tightening our budgets and learn from this, and the good thing is we've got a lot of expenses here. We now know what to expect moving forward with these types of events. I think that we could do some very good events and possibly events that could generate some revenue as opposed to it costing that we could actually generate revenue. So great job to the staff, and it was a great weekend, and we should all be proud of it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If there's no further comment, then moved by Councillor Stockwell and seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Resolved that the Community Service Section of Coordinating Committee does receive the following report as information.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Deputy Mayor Blank-Folchi.
In favor?
Councillor Bray.
In favor?
Councillor Eagle.
In favor.
Councillor Smith.
In favor.
Mayor Smith.
In favor.
Councillor Stockwell.
Favor.
Chair Boulanger.
In favor?
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 7 in favor, 0 opposed.
And the last item in Community Service Section to be pulled was update proposed major festival area at the sport park.
I think I pulled that, Mr. Chairman. I just simply would like to refer this report to the planning department and have them continue to give consideration of following down whatever is needed to come up with a festival area in the sports park. It becomes a planning issue now, and I think it's something that they can give consideration to and continue to report back to council, keep council advised as to how it proceeds. So I would just make that a motion that the matter be referred to planning to continue the investigation of a major festival area at the sports park.
Thank you. It was also pulled by Council Bray, so Council Bray.
Thank you. I think the last statement in the report says that if council wishes to proceed in this direction, the report will come forward detail the planning and legal costs to undertake the official plan and zoning bylaw amendments for these lands. So I guess the bigger decision in receiving the staff report is whether we want to proceed in this direction. And I think if we do, I would just ask that the cost that we've spent on our sports park to date to get it into the condition that it is be looked at, as well as that we do a market analysis of the events such as Way Home, Boots and Hearts, because I think that market is evolving and changing. I know the Way Home concert for 2018 has been canceled, so I think before we spend a lot of money developing a space for something, its time might have come and gone. So I just want to be cautious as we move down this path. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, and I'm just looking to the CO. Don't we have an amount in the proposed budget to deal with this already? Yeah. 250,000, I think. So I think it's already one of those items that we're discussing through the budget process, so I don't want to here say, yeah, let's go for something when we're discussing it at a different level, that's all.
Thank you. Any other comments? Did you have a comment?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chair, I just respond to the Deputy Mayor. Yes, staff have put money into the proposed budget at this particular point in time. It was put in there as a placeholder, certainly pending council's direction with respect to having staff look at the details in terms of what would be required in terms of studies, et cetera, to bring something like this forward. We haven't done that yet. We just put that placeholder in there. The next step, as outlined in the director's report, would be for planning to look at it and say you would need an environmental assessment, you would need an archaeological assessment, you would need this, you would need that, and then have some preliminary costs for those types of studies, including the fees for an official plan amendment and a zoning amendment and any legal fees. So those would just be estimates, and those would come back to committee as a report to outline to committee what the costs would be on a preliminary basis, and then council can decide, yes, we want to proceed, or no, we don't want to proceed. So that's where we're waiting for direction from council at this point. Anything we've done now is just a placeholder.
Okay, so by supporting that direction today, we are in no way, if I support that today, I'm in no way saying I agree with it. We're just saying bring back the costs. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just confirming.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
thank
correct.
you.
Yep.
Okay. Yes, Councillor Stockwell.
I think the intent of the motion is to specifically give one department the responsibility to continue on with the investigation. Right now it's split between departments. This is the update for the recreation events facilities. That's fine, we've got that. Now it's down to a planning issue. And now it should be given to the planners and let them continue to investigate and report back.
And I don't disagree that when it comes to the official plan and zoning that it's a planning issue. However, I think that there's a lot of other items to consider in this, and I want to make sure that our park staff that are out there have input as well, because they have an investment in that park to date as getting it to where it is. So I think that it's not just a matter of looking at the official plans. There's a whole slew of issues that we need to have addressed and looked at with several staff members before I could ever agree to move forward with something like that.
I just have a comment for that I don't think was brought up before. We had talked about potentially another location that might have been more ready, but when you look at South Georgian Bay and you look at what's going to occur over the next 8 to 10 years, and it's very positive. I'm just wondering whether we refer it to planning for the time being, but that we look at the potential of involving the county Like certainly when you get events of this size, I think the economic benefit goes far beyond Wasaga Beach. And especially if it was ultimately at the sports park, very close to Clearview, Stainer, very just as close almost to go to Collingwood. So there might be an opportunity to share costs and to look at this as more of a Simcoe County project, but that's just a thought. I think Mayor Smith was first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hear you. I think we have to do our homework before we reach out to anybody else. However, I think we need to see what the costs are. We need to see what the planning implications are. Let's do that. Let's do our homework first, and then if we decide to reach out to the county or other local communities who will benefit from that, then at least we're going to be going to them with something that's substantial enough that they can understand as well as us. So I think we need to investigate this. I don't know that we need to spend any money until we have this report come back. And with respect to the environmental, I think that again, we have very highly qualified staff here in the town of Wasaga Beach that are very capable, and they'll reach out, I'm sure, to the appropriate levels of government and so on and so forth to find out what it is that we need, and we'll be able to come up with something there. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I was just going to comment on county involvement. I think that they do have a tourism funding stream already in existence. I think myself, even sitting as a county councillor, I think I would struggle with picking Wasaga Beach and saying, hey, we're going to give you extra money because you're going to bring people in and you're going to have them camp and they're going to stay in this one area. I think it could be a very hard sell, but they do have already a section there that fit under one of those headings, then maybe there would be an opportunity there. Thank you.
Councillor Smith?
Just to go on the Deputy Mayor's comment, as I'm listening, I'm wondering if the tourism committee is one that maybe could consider this as well at the beginning, because we do have Catherine Stevenson, RTO 7, and the province at the table, and we could certainly get a quick answer from the committee.
Okay, Councillor Stubbs.
Mr. Chairman, that's really what the motion is trying to avoid. We've had this thing on our table since, Mr. Mayor, since April, I guess, and we haven't progressed that far. And we understand why we haven't progressed that far, because it's a much bigger thing. We thought at one time the promoter would come in and cover some costs, etc. The promoter looks at the costs that are being recommended and not arguing with them, but saying, I don't own this land, and I don't think I want to investigate hundreds of thousands of dollars on something that I don't own. Understand it. The municipality owns the land. All I'm trying to do by this motion is specifically say we have to clean up and understand clearly the land use of this park. And that belongs in the planning department. So certainly planning can reach out to any other division of the municipality staff, but as far as responsibility goes, I'd like to see until we get a report back, the next step is clearly a planning step. And that's why I'm suggesting what I'm suggesting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to piggyback a little bit on what Councillor Stockwell is talking about, I think that the information that Council will receive as part of this step with respect to the planning department will give it sufficient information to make a decision with respect to the budget. Yeah. Because there's going to be a budget implication, and that is the first step. Do you want to spend the money with respect to what's going to be required to undertake this study? And you'll be considering that with all the other requests for expenditure. So I think this is a very important step so that Council has a true figure in terms of what the costs are going to be, and then you can make a decision whether you want to proceed.
Does Doug want to?
Go ahead, Andrew.
Mr. Chair, I think Director would like to.
Oh, Doug, would you like to make a comment?
With your permission, Mr. Chair, from the planning perspective, to me, it seems that the issue
is there's actually two issues. The first one is permitted use, which is fully in the planning realm. And the second one is the implementation and actually organizing an event on the site if the permitted use is in play. So in listening to the comments from all the speakers around the table, it seems to me that planning can very well undertake and report back to committee on what it would take to change the use at the park itself. And we can look at the studies, including a financial study, given that we realize that there are some events that are not going to occur next year because of lack of attendance. So that's a worthwhile study to do, to put those costs in front of council solely to speak of change of use, and we can report back on how long it'll take. And then the other aspect of it, in terms of actually coordinating an event and implementing it on site, then we get into the detail. And planning would definitely require the help of recreation staff to get into that design detail. In fact, public works staff as well, but for transportation issues. So I think all I'm suggesting is, yes, planning is well capable of handling the change of use side and reporting back on the cost and time and implications, and then possibly the other component would be actually implementation of it and coordination for possibly with earth productions going forward.
As long as you're standing up, Doug, we've been asking the question on a number of issues, but what would be a realistic timeline to expect to report back? I know you're a pretty busy department right now, and Councillor Stockwell, you might want to comment on what your thoughts were on that as well.
I'll leave that to the professional.
The caveat to that one is getting a response from the consultants on a round quote for what it would cost to do the studies. So we're looking at an archaeological study, we're looking at a focused environmental impact study, we're looking at potentially a noise impact study. We're looking at a marketing study as well, which that one I'll have to suss out to figure out the best source to go for that expertise. Potentially we would be looking at some type of a traffic impact study. I would want to speak with the Director of Public Works a little bit more on whether that's an absolute need. But basically we're trying to focus it down and tighten it up to look only at change of use at this time. We're not fully looking at the physical impact of change and site design and water servicing and all the other issues that could complicate the change of use. That would come along at a later date, although the devil is always in the details. So I think to answer your question in terms of timing, it would take at least a couple of months to get those quotes back. So I would suggest that staff could report back in December. If we were to move forward with the study, the scoped EIS would have to occur in the late spring once the plants have begun to grow in the wetlands for the biologists to do their work. So the full application would only commence, I would suggest, end of May, early June. And it takes 6 to 9 months to get through the zoning and OPA. So final approval would not be until the spring or early year 2019. And that's taking it through a site-specific process. There's another element that we could look at. We could look at rolling it into the whole official plan update that we're currently working on. But that, us planners are talking about that in-house, but that would take a little longer.
Thank you. Any further comments? Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. So Councillor Stockwell had requested that there be a friendly amendment made to the recommendation. So if I can read it to the committee, it would state, resolve that the Community Services Section of Coordinated Committee receive this update report on the efforts of staff working to bring large-scale events to the Wasaga Sports Park, and further that this matter be referred to the Planning Department for continued investigation and a future report to committee. So that was moved by Councillor Ego and seconded by Councillor Smith. Are you both in favor of that change? Sorry.
Okay, moved by Councillor Eagle and seconded by Councillor Smith. Resolved that the Community Service Section and Coordinating Committee receive this update report on the efforts of staff working to bring large-scale events to the Wasaga Sports Park, and further that this matter be referred to the Planning Department for continued investigation and a future report to committee.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think the reason for going to the planning committee is to obtain estimates for legal and planning costs. These are budget estimates, they're not detailed quotes, they're just estimates to go in the budget. So if I may, I think that those words should be added at the end of that motion.
Legal and planning?
Yeah, legal, as per the last paragraph of the staff report.
Okay, so I'm, rather than read the whole thing, I'll just read the last area here, is that okay? And further that this matter be referred to the Planning Department for continued investigation and a further report to committee regarding estimated legal and planning costs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Deputy Mayor Bolton.
In favor?
Councillor Bray.
In favor?
Councillor Ego.
In favor.
Councillor Smith.
In favor.
Mayor Smith.
In favor?
Councillor Stockwell.
Favor.
Chair Boulanger.
In favor?
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 7 in favor, 0 opposed.
What are people feeling? Is a 10-minute recess? Mayor Smith?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I understand we have the OPP report here and they don't come to us on a regular basis now, but I'd like to suggest that perhaps we invite them to come and give us a report on the summer in our next meeting. We don't need them here monthly, that's fine, but it would be good to have, I think, them here to let us know how the summer went and a breakdown of that.
Is that direction?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll make the request and ask them if they would make themselves available for the October meeting.
How can we say we adjourn until 10 after 10? Is that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pass these over to Kelly.